In this video, we'll explore a profound question rooted in biblical interpretation. Is Jesus, as described in the New Testament, simply the first creature God created, or is he God himself? This question arises because many early Christian writers believed that passages in the Old Testament, like Proverbs 8, referred to Christ's prehuman existence. Let's dive into Proverbs 8 verse 22, where it says, "The Lord created me at the beginning of his work, the first of his acts of old." At first glance, it may seem like this passage is talking about Christ, and some early Christians, like Justin Martyr, thought so. But when we look closer, we find something deeper. Proverbs 8 isn't speaking of Jesus directly. Rather, it personifies wisdom as an attribute of God. In ancient Jewish literature, including wisdom texts like Ecclesiasticus and the Book of Wisdom, the attribute of wisdom is often described in ways that resemble a living being. Here, Solomon is portraying wisdom as a woman, not because it's a separate entity from God, but as a poetic device. The Hebrew word for wisdom, chokmah, is feminine, which explains the personification. This brings us to the Hebrew word kana, used in Proverbs 8 verse 22, which is often translated as created. But the word kana can also mean acquired or possessed. So, a more accurate reading might be, "The Lord acquired me at the beginning of his work." This aligns with how Proverbs frequently uses the word kana to mean acquiring wisdom, as seen in Proverbs 4 verse 7. "The beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom, and whatever you get insight." Now, how does this fit with Jesus' identity? Proverbs 8 is talking about God's wisdom, not as a created being, but as an essential attribute of God, eternally present with him. We see this clearly in Proverbs 3 verse 19, which says, "By wisdom, the Lord laid the earth's foundations." God's wisdom was present and active in creation. We also find this concept echoed in the New Testament. The Apostle John writes, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." John 1 verse 1. This word, or logos in Greek, is identified as Jesus. John is saying that Jesus, as the Word, existed with God from the very beginning. He wasn't created. He was eternally with God and was, in fact, God. Furthermore, Colossians 1 verse 16 says of Jesus, "For by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible." Jesus wasn't created. Rather, he is the one through whom all things were made. So, how do we reconcile Proverbs 8 with these New Testament descriptions of Jesus? The key lies in understanding the poetic and figurative language used in Proverbs. The description of wisdom being birthed or brought forth is a metaphor for God's eternal wisdom being revealed in creation. It doesn't imply that wisdom, nor Christ, was created. It's more about how God's wisdom was expressed in the formation of the universe. When we consider Jesus, we recognize him as the embodiment of God's wisdom. In 1 Corinthians 1 verse 24, Paul calls Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God. This means Jesus, as the eternal Son of God, wasn't created but is God's wisdom made manifest in human form. In conclusion, Proverbs 8 verse 22 doesn't prove that Christ was created. Instead, it highlights God's eternal wisdom, a wisdom that was fully revealed in the person of Jesus. He is not the first creature, but rather the eternal Son of God, begotten, not made, as the Nicene Creed declares. So, while early Christian writers used Proverbs 8 to point to Jesus' prehuman existence, it ultimately affirms his divine nature, not a created status. He is the eternal Word, the wisdom through whom all things were made.